Camera back to me. I think we're live. Hello, everyone, and thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. In case you're new here, each week we meet in virtual reality using the latest technologies to discuss the next generation of personal computing. My name is Ian Hamilton. I'm in the United States, joined by my colleague David Heaney in Northern Ireland. VR brings us together into this broadcast studio where we've got multiple automatic cameras, a TV behind us to show images and videos to our viewers, and we can see live comments from YouTube on our tablets in front of us. We syndicate VR Download out to all podcast platforms and encourage our audience to become members, subscribe to our work, support our journalism as we continue to chronicle the next steps in personal computing. We've had a big week here with some late breaking news. Sorry we're a little late getting going here. I hope you all enjoy my suit. I'll look at your comments here in a minute. Heaney, what do we have today?
Today we're going to talk about Meta laying off 11,000 staff, including some from its AR/VR division. Pimax launching a Kickstarter for a handheld console that turns into a VR headset, kind of a mixture between a Switch and a Quest. Red Matter 2 revealing Pico 4's GPU performance advantage over Quest 2. Pico 4 sales reportedly not meeting expectations. And finally, the apparent leak of the new HTC Vive headset coming next year.
Yeah, I'm still hearing the popping. Heaney's saying that mine's popping a little bit too, or you can hear the scuffing a little bit. I actually added a little bit of a wind guard to the microphones on my Quest Pro to see if it helps a little bit with mine. I'm convinced our face shapes are different enough that that's actually what's contributing to the difference in the popping between our devices. We've obviously reached out to Meta to see if there is anything software-wise that might come to fix that. We've seen reports from other people who have Quest Pro discussing this issue, so it is not isolated to our devices. Thank you to our new member. I saw someone joined up earlier. I missed their name as it's gone by. Mark, thank you so much. Dune Adam. And I see Guy Godin in our comments today, the creator of Virtual Desktop. Thank you for tuning in. We've got, that first news. Should we get right into Meta laying off 11,000? Obviously, leave your questions in our comments, and we will try to get to them throughout the show. And of course, if you have an answer to a question, please help out your other viewers with your answers. And I'm seeing Alyssa saying hello from Denver, Colorado. Just ordered their PSVR 2 today. I ordered mine a few minutes ago. It says delivery between February 22nd and the 28th. A lot of people out there lining up to get their PSVR 2s coming to them in early 2023. Very, very big day. But let's start off first with this Meta layoffs news. So 11,000 people. That's a very large percentage. I think it's 13%. Is that right, Heaney, of Meta's total workforce, including people like David Jagno, our former coworker here, went to Meta. Somebody hire him out there. He's out on Twitter looking for work. One of many, many great people that lost their jobs this week. Anything to add there?
Yeah, so a comment here asking, did Meta give any indication of how many were from the VR division laid off? No, they did not. They did confirm that there were layoffs. And as Ian mentioned, we know of one there, our former colleague. Another one was someone who was instrumental to some of the first-party introductory titles, like First Steps and the other introductory experiences you had for Touch and Quest. So sad to see them go. From what we know, though, the majority of the layoffs were within the traditional elements of Meta's business, such as Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.
Yeah, some head-scratching departures. I saw someone asking if my avatar changed too. I did mess with my avatar a little bit. I went into the avatar editor again. I touch it once every, 5 months or something like that. I don't like the avatar editor to begin with, and I've had a hard time finding myself in those avatars at all. Just the way the system works where you like pick a basic shape and then have to pick your body shape. Like I can't make heads or tails of it, but I'm going to keep doing that searching for an avatar I really identify with over time because I still haven't found it.
So, as far as I understand, what they do plan to do eventually is allow you to take a picture and then, based on your face, it will generate the avatar for you. Ironically, that's what they had in Facebook Spaces, which was a social app for the Oculus Rift, which they eventually deprecated, one of the many previous social apps that they completely got rid of in one of those former avatar systems. So it's surprising that they built all the technology to do that and then completely abandoned it for years only to come back to it. But that's really the story of Meta's journey in VR in so many ways so far and on so many different levels.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if we see a Q&A from Andrew Bosworth, the CTO at Meta, fairly soon. One of the questions I had put out there was whether the wristband is still an active project. There's been reporting out there that Meta is basically pulling out of Portal and as well as their watch efforts, which I never got off the ground. They killed a watch that was supposed to come out this year, I think. And the thing I'll just add on the watch is you got to not confuse their watch efforts with the wristband work. So within weeks before MetaConnect, we went face to face with Mark Zuckerberg in the real world, and he demonstrated their wristband research. And he said at that time that the neural wristband that they're working on is still a high priority for their team. It's still one of 4 core platforms that they're building within the Reality Labs division for the future of their company over the next decade and a half. And I don't think that that has been canceled. I'm pretty sure that is still true, given that that came from Zuckerberg himself, undoubtedly while they were still in talks for these layoffs. But I think it's probably good to get a confirmation from Meta after these layoffs happened that they're still going to be focusing on this wristband work, because he had some very big things to say about that, thinking that within, what was it, 6 years, he could see the wristband providing a faster way of communicating using AR and assume eventually VR, but using AR as pairing with this wristband, you could theoretically train yourself in tandem with the wristband to interact with a computer faster than a keyboard is more or less what he supposes. It's a very, very tall order, something we have to believe and actually try out firsthand, and probably over a very large length of time to actually see that happen for real, right, Heaney?
Yeah, it's definitely worth asking, but I think, as you say, it's extremely unlikely that that project was cancelled. Zuckerberg has described it as key to Meta's future, and from the reports we've seen so far, their plan is to include it with their AR glasses, which reportedly should launch somewhere around 2026. So that's, it's the input device for the device that Zuckerberg in the long term sees being the future of his entire company. So, yeah, extremely unlikely that that would have been cancelled.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just there we see so much miscommunication out there over, like, even over on the Apple side of things, where Apple's AR glasses get delayed, which makes sense because we talk about on the show constantly how hard it is to miniaturize transparent optics to the level we actually need to. But people confuse what that project is with the immediate project that we expect to see, which is opaque optics that reconstruct the world with computer vision. Basically, the same thing the Quest Pro and the Quest are doing, Pico is doing, everyone is doing, but just going to be a very different branded situation as soon as we get to that. Um, any questions you want to respond to there, Heaney?
I think we can move on talking about Pimax.
Oh, goodness, Pimax. I think a lot of our viewers out there are excited to hear our thoughts on this. They are crowdfunding on Kickstarter as we speak. while we are
Oh,
recording this sorry, go ahead.
the one last comment I want to bring up. Someone very rightly pointed out that Amazon are also laying off around 10,000 people. And yeah, we should add the context that this isn't something that was happening specific to Meta. This is something that is happening across the entire tech industry. At the very least, companies are doing hiring freezes, and at most, they're laying off thousands of people. So it looks like it'll be a very difficult winter ahead for the entire tech industry.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not alone. Very significant layoffs, and the number from Amazon was similar to the number uh, from Meta. And the thing to keep in mind is that these companies are in entirely different stages of their evolutions, right? So 11,000 from Meta is not, you can't apples to apples compare that to the number from Amazon, or the fact that there haven't been layoffs announced from Apple, but they have stopped hiring, they have frozen hiring, where, at a company like Apple, they've got so many stores in their footprint. It's just, you can't compare these one after the other. It's very difficult for everyone right now. Right before we came in here, we saw the protocol, which has Janko, one of the reporters who's been following VR for a long time. They just shut down the whole website. So yeah, please become a member and support our work. I'll just put that out there. Um, let's talk about Pimax. I know our viewers out there are anxious to hear what we think of this. I'm I'm gonna let Heaney take it away, and then I'll give my commentary. I don't know that I'm gonna choose my words carefully as I talk through this. I would like to choose my words carefully, but I don't know that I can do that. So Heaney, why don't you explain it?
Yeah, so if you didn't catch this news, Pimax have announced an Android handheld console that essentially runs Android phone games but with physical controls at the side, and those controls detach just like the Nintendo Switch to go into VR controller shells, while the unit itself can detach to go into a VR headset shell. And to be clear, that VR accessory is sold separately. So this is an incredibly ambitious product that is trying to really do two things at once. And it comes at a time where Pimax has not yet shipped the two VR headsets it already has announced. So this is actually the third device in their new family, their new generation of VR 3.0 devices. These devices are unlike Pimax's former wide field of view PC VR headsets. These are standalone devices that use the same XR2 chip you see in the Quest 2 and Pico 4. So Pimax is trying to go from solely selling PC headsets to selling headsets that can be standalone or PC, while at the same time trying to launch an entire handheld console that can be, modular in all these different ways. And yeah, it's really astonishing to see a company announce such an ambitious product before it shipped the two incredibly ambitious products it already announced. I don't think we've really ever seen anything like that in the VR sector so far. And some people have noted that Pimax have already posted some videos of people using this. So this is actually not just a render, there is a physical product. But I would note, as I always do in these sort of situations, that making a prototype is a completely different ballgame to shipping a consumer product at scale while still making a sustainable product. So this is a Kickstarter project, and if you want to support it, you can back it. But keep in mind that Kickstarter is not a pre order system. Then there's no guarantee you will actually get what you pledged for. And Pimax has repeatedly in the past failed to meet its own shipping targets by at best months and sometimes years. So I would approach this with significant skepticism. Although, let's assume that they can pull it off and put all that to the side. It is a really interesting idea for a product, and I'm very interested to actually try it out.
Yeah, I really appreciate Heaney's level-headed breakdown there, and seeing our comments. Where was the comment here asking us why would I choose my words carefully? Well, uh, maybe it's a little too inside baseball, but I come from a journalism background. I went to journalism school. Try to have an objective lol. Lol. I just said lol out loud, laughing out loud. Yeah. That was weird. Heaney and I both got booted at the exact same moment. No idea why that happened. Uh, what I was trying to say is that I try to have an objective, balanced point of view, try to be skeptical at the same time that I personally get pretty excited for certain products that are out there, ideas. We're dealing with the very cutting edge, the future of personal computing when we talk about this stuff, and there are new ideas being expressed all the time. So it is, that's a lot of context to give you there about why we've got a lot of things to balance out when we're trying to get the news out there about things that are in entirely different stages of actually being realized, right? We're trying to give fairness to everyone that's doing different things out there. Heaney did a really good job of explaining the difference between a product that's created as a prototype and one that's actually shipped. If you go over and look at the Kickstarter project for Pimax, they have said that they're in user testing, their final testing, I, d- that has tricky terminology there, but they're in testing for the Pimax viewer part of this product, and they expect to ship this in January. So it is mid-November as we record this, and they're claiming shipment in January. If I had to place a bet right now over whether they would actually ship this in January, the question isn't would I actually place the bet. The question is what kind of odds would I give of just how unlikely it is that they'll actually miss their shipping targets here. I think it's that unlikely that they will deliver on the time frame that they've given. Now, again, additional context here. Heaney and I, whenever Pimax and this company actually announce anything, we dive into the news, we dive into the information, we try to figure out how real any of this is. We got an email from Pimax about several weeks ago now, asking if they could include our logo on the Pimax Kickstarter website. I replied very quickly, no, I don't think that's appropriate. And then I asked if they could provide us hardware which Heaney could test. I would love to see Heaney get his hands on this device so that we can actually give real opinions, a firsthand experience with it. The reply was, English wasn't. I wouldn't say that I think English was the first language of the person who replied. Makes sense. It's a China-based company. But in that email reply, they say that they will do a road show very soon, and the devices will be tuned on site for users. And it just, I don't, that doesn't, that's not the same as shipping a device to David Heaney at home to test out of the box in the same consumer packaging that everyone else gets, right? Going to a trade show, even if you, so CS is coming up, Pimax is usually at CS. If they're there at CS, we will go try it out and give our opinions of what we saw at CES. But getting that device, even in that setting, is not the same as a consumer product that you actually get at home. Again, like I said, in the consumer retail packaging that everyone else gets. I just have to express so much to our audience the long, huge gap between showing a video that promises all of these things and actually getting out in volume a device that meets all of those expectations. And we don't have a history to report that Pimax has been able to deliver on those things. You asked for my just straight thoughts. Those are my straight thoughts. The only thing I'll add, I suppose, is Pimax there is an audience out there that like the wide field of view, that are willing to deal with the buggy, problematic software and all those issues, just because field of view is that important to them. But again, I will still take anything you see shared by random user accounts online with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Pimax has ever shipped anything that it has announced on time, at least maybe some of its accessories, but none of its major products have ever actually shipped at the time at the time it's announced. You say there that some people are willing to put up with the wide field of view. I've said this many times, but field of view really is the biggest driver of immersion in VR. And what I like about Pimax is that they are the only company shipping wide field of view to consumers. You can describe some of the newer headsets with around 110 degrees as wide, but when it comes to some of these Pimax headsets that have a horizontal field of view around 150 or 160 degrees, they really feel claustrophobic in comparison. So I really wish Pimax would just stop trying to announce 10 different products at once and just focus for 2 or 3 years on delivering one really incredible headset. Put all of their work and all of their marketing into not 10, one product, and deliver and focus and polish it and then ship it out and support it. Make sure that its design, it doesn't have any of the design flaws we've seen. Make sure quality assurance is good. Make sure they work on the software. It just seems that they're a small startup trying to do the work of a massive hardware company, and that's what leads to all of their problems. I don't understand, maybe there are financial reasons that they're trying to do that. Maybe it's that if you continuously try and get more money from pre-orders and pledges, it can then fund their future ambitions in a way that they can't have if they have these longer development cycles. But you'd think if you are going to use Kickstarter, that would give you the freedom to focus. So yeah, the thing I want to see from Pimax is focus, because they're delivering something that is so important to VR. They're delivering something that enthusiasts really want, and rightfully so, and aren't being served by the bigger companies. And yet, frustratingly, they just can't actually sit down and focus and deliver that in a real polished product.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm not putting my money into the Kickstarter for Pimax. Heaney is not going to be putting his money into the Kickstarter for Pimax. And if you go read our article that we put out on this project, we recommended extreme caution to anyone considering backing them. And I say that as we're speaking this, as I'm literally saying these words, Pimax is in the final stretch of clearing its $200,000 uh, all or nothing goal on Kickstarter. They're probably going to clear it, and I'm seeing people like laughing in our comments, imagining what if they actually deliver. That's the thing about this product. I saw someone talking about they're like concept cars. That's an interesting analogy to think about. When I look at this product and the concept of this product, I think of something that is just so, so, so cool, right? It's such a cool idea. But that there is not the track record here to actually deliver on that concept from this company. This is the product I would like. This is close to the product that would be amazing to imagine Valve shipping. I don't think they would, because I think going back to the Daydream-esque type system here is not going to give you the quality that Valve likes to deliver out of virtual reality, but it's still amazingly cool to imagine a Steam Deck doing this sort of thing, right? And it's they're trying. It always feels like they're trying to coast off of the innovations of others while trying to bring their own flair and ideas to bear here. But again, you have to put this idea in context of multi-year delays for every other thing that they've done. You can't expect Valve level delivery out of this little company. So you've got to put those two and two together, and a lot of those people going to back them over on Kickstarter are probably not going to be aware of that full context there. So I don't know. It's like I said,
Yeah.
as soon as we're able to get this hands-on, we're going to go hands-on and give our thoughts of what we actually tested, and
I mean, I
we'll add
said
that
it
additional
was
context.
I mean, I said it was a cool idea, but I don't actually think it's a good idea. And the obvious reason is the weight balance. This just does not work from an ergonomics perspective. If you look what other headsets are doing, they're using much smaller panels with pancake lenses to deliver a experience that doesn't feel like wearing a brick on your face, and this feels like going a step backwards. It's good in that it can deliver value in that you get two things at once. You get this handheld console and you get this VR headset, and the prices they're talking about here are actually incredibly appealing. They're saying that they want to ship this console for $300, and then you can get it as a package with the headset for the higher end storage model for 450. That's incredibly good value if they can pull it off, but I still don't think the weight balance is going to work here.
Yeah, so I asked Heaney Rexha right before we came in here whether he had his Quest 2 as a backup in case the microphone issue was still hitting him hard, and it is still hitting him hard. It's weird because, yeah, I've got a Quest Pro, and tell me in the comments if my Quest Pro is scuffing at all, really, compared to what's going on with Heaney's headset. Because I go and listen through this podcast after it's recorded and do the edits, and mine sounds pretty good. The microphone sounds amazing overall, except for that scuffing situation. And yeah, like we've
Yeah,
said,
so maybe we should explain the kind of technical aspect behind that. If you look at UploadVR.com, you can see an article where we explain this, but there's two things going on here. One is that they've moved the microphones into the center of the nose gap, whereas the Quest 2's microphones are actually on the sides, far away from your mouth. So they've brought it closer into the middle where your mouth actually comes. And because it's a much slimmer headset, that even brings it even further close. So both horizontally and from a depth perspective, the microphone is closer to your mouth. And that introduces a problem known as the proximity effect in audio, where low frequency noises start to be distorted and amplified. And then that introduces a problem in human speech recording called plosives, where you probably just heard it there. When you make the sound like a P or a B, or any of those other sounds where there's a kind of dramatic stopping and then blasting out of air from your mouth, that's going to be picked up and come across as popping. So as Ian mentioned, this is something that we reached out to Meta about. It's something that it looks like it could just be a design flaw in the Quest Pro. So the potential only optimism I can see here is that there are 3 of those microphones now in the nose gap, which is more than any other standalone headset. So possibly they could do some sort of audio processing technique in the very long term to cancel it out. But yeah, for now, that does look like a potential design flaw. Ready to talk about Red Matter 2?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I'm convinced that my face shape is, and maybe the way I'm wearing it, he has figured out the exact way to wear the Quest Pro for maximum comfort, and that's another thing that's an issue. Whereas I'm just convinced I've got a face shape that keeps the air blocked from hitting the microphone more often than it's hitting Heaney's microphone. But yeah, let's get to that next subject, Red Matter 2. So this is really, really interesting. Heaney's got the full breakdown of the performance difference of Red Matter 2 from Pico to Quest. So Heaney, why don't you run us through some of the differences there?
Yeah, so Red Matter 2 is the known pretty much as the highest graphical fidelity game on standalone headsets. I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. And they've delivered something on Quest 2 that no one really thought they could. A game that looks more like something that came from a console than something that came out of a mobile chip. On Quest Pro, they were the first title to support eye-tracked foveated rendering, meaning that they could increase the resolution by 30% using that feature. And we tested that out, and as I noted, you can't actually notice it changing, so that's very promising for future headsets. But on Pico 4 port, which doesn't have eye tracking, they were still able to increase the resolution by pretty much double. They're pretty much able to double the base resolution. And the reason behind this is that Pico 4 has a better cooling system than Quest 2. So Quest 2 uses a really quite small and weak cooling fan, although there is a cooling fan, whereas Pico 4's is a bigger fan with larger vents. You can actually see on the bottom here, that little element there is the bottom vent, and then there's an even larger one on the top. And so this means that whereas the GPU on Quest 2 is slightly underclocked, only slightly, on Pico 4, it's able to go to the absolute maximum that the XR2 Gen 1 chip officially supports. So you get 20% more GPU power. That's not the only reason they were able to increase the resolution, though. It's also the fact that there is a compounding effect here where because they were able to increase the resolution, they were able to actually reduce the anti-aliasing, because as any gamer will know, the higher resolution you go, the less anti-aliasing is actually needed, because the less aliasing you'll get from the image. So that allows them to even further increase the resolution. There's also the fact that they were using a more aggressive fixed foveated rendering level. Fixed foveated rendering being when you render the edges of the lens in a lower resolution, not based on where you're looking, just based on the lens itself. So when you put those three factors together, you get this much higher resolution eye buffer than Quest 2. Although I should note that because the field of view of Pico 4 is wider and taller than Quest 2, this will not equate to a doubling of angular resolution, but it should be a noticeably higher resolution. And it goes to show that even with the same chip, a better cooling system can enable better performance.
Any comments there you want to respond to? Because we've still got a lot of things rolling out on our previous subject and sort of Meta's focus. We had the layoffs 11,000 story at the beginning of our show, and I think there's some thoughts and comments to reply about there on this overall issue. But why don't we finish off on this subject before we talk about those things?
Yeah, just looking for any comments here. Artful pointing out that Pico 4 Pro hits the streets next month. As we pointed out on the show before, Pico 4 Pro is actually not coming out outside China. It is only launching to the West as Pico 4 Enterprise and will only be sold to companies and will only run an enterprise version of the App Store that doesn't have games like this. Guy Godin in our comments saying that things like app startup time are much lower on Pico 4. It's a significant improvement for both CPU and GPU. So yes, that's a great point to point out that this cooling is not just applicable to the GPU. As I said, Quest 2's GPU is slightly underclocked, but its CPU is actually significantly underclocked. So getting that better performance, better cooling in enables this better performance. Although the interesting thing that I noted in my Pico 4 review is that I actually noticed stuttering in many games that didn't stutter on Quest 2. So it's really interesting to wonder why that might be. Is it that even with the better GPU and CPU performance, the base resolution, the default resolution is just too high for what the headset's capable of? Is this some sort of system background processes interfering with the games that in a way that Pico could fix with patches? Is it that there are some minor software techniques that Meta supports in their SDKs that Pico doesn't yet? There are a few of those, but we don't know how much those come into play. So I'll be really interested to kind of come back and write about this again when we get to, say, 6 months after the Pico 4 launch, because I'd really love to know how developers start to take advantage of this and whether that is still the issue. Because regardless of the fact that on paper it shouldn't be happening, I play the same game on Quest 2 and don't see any frame drops, and then I go and play that exact same game on Pico 4 and I see frame drops. And that was one of the things I noted in my review. So yeah, it's really curious to wonder why that might happen.
Is that it for Red Matter 2 that you want to get into right now, Heaney, or anybody else pop up there that you want to respond to now?
Guy Godin just bringing in some context here, saying there's still some compositor differences that are leading to slightly more stutters. So suggesting there that Pico's graphical compositor pipeline is just a little bit less refined than Meta's. But the good news for Pico 4 owners there is that is something that can be improved with software updates over time. That's not a hardware limitation.
So the two comments here that I want to respond to and get into like a discussion about is Bradley's joke saying social focused company mucking up the voice communication irony. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was mucking up that he was trying to say there. But no, and then Dunadim saying Meta is a data collection company, not a hardware company. And I think I'm just going to add a little anecdote there from this discussion with this face-to-face meeting I had with Mark Zuckerberg, Andrew Bosworth, where I'm there with several other journalists. We've all just tried the Quest Pro headset. We come and sit down, and then they walk Mark Zuckerberg into the room, shakes hands with everyone, and then sits down. And then Mark Zuckerberg asks the first question. He's sitting there with 6 journalists, or 5 or 6 journalists, and he's the first one to put a question to the reporters. at the sitting where the reporter should be asking the question. It's such a silly little thing to key in on, but it kind of points to the data collection at the very top, right? And I don't mean that in the like the misuse of data aspect that a lot of people talk about. This is a company that makes its decisions based on information handed to it. And I'm giving that context here just because assuming that there's no difference in the hardware between Heaney's headset and my own, assuming that the hardware is identical, then it's our face shapes that are contributing to this difference. Now, the hardware could be different. There could be like a bug in Heaney's hardware that makes his operate differently, but I'm going to guess it's the face shape situation. Because, and then you go to things like all the facts that are true about all of these hardware designs. Over on the Valve Index, you've got multiple knobs in order to adjust the headset exactly to your face shape. You've got, the strap knobs, you've got the lens difference, then you've got the IPD adjustment, and you've got all of these different approaches to all of these different fitting things. You've got different IPDs, different distances between the eyes on every single person. You have to test out these devices on so many people in order to make sure things like this don't happen. And I think it's a tricky thing to think that the executives at Meta probably spent a significant amount of time inside the Quest Pros that were handed to them. They made firsthand decisions about what things to include in the box. Zuckerberg in that same meeting pointed out that he wanted to ship the headset ship the headset open. They wanted that to be a fundamental feature of this device. And then they shipped these blockers that only cover the sides, they don't cover the bottom, and then clearly had this kind of like realization near the end that a lot of people are going to want the full light blockers. A lot of people are reporting getting sick because of that mismatch between seeing the real world out the sides of this headset and then seeing simulated motion in various virtual worlds. All this is to say that yes, Meta is traditionally a data collection company, and yes, they make their decisions based on data. But I think what we're seeing is them growing up into a company that needs to have their hardware roll out in a way that makes more sense for their business model, right? I don't know why they don't have, like a beta testing program. That's if we take this back to the Pimax system where they go and do this roadshow, right? They're promising this roadshow where they're going to take this headset to multiple people. Do they have a system in place? Does Pimax have a system in place to learn from the people that are actually giving firsthand feedback from these devices? Like, that's what I saw in Zuckerberg's question to these reporters. He's asking reporters who have firsthand deep knowledge of these VR headsets, what do you think? And it's like this. They're constantly getting information to better inform their decision making. I don't know why we don't have like an early access program for these devices. And I'm saying that as like, I'm watching all these people go and buy PSVR 2 and getting frustrated, some of them, because something happened in the pre-order process to deny them their first in line status. Like, I just think over time, VR headsets would probably benefit from beta testing or even multiple generations of like release to early adopters. If you've been in this a really long time, it makes sense to become part of like a beta program and give direct feedback to these companies. I almost wonder if that's what the Meta Ambassador program is going to be over time.
Yeah, so James O'Loughlin pointing out that Meta, a company at their scale, they obviously do this usability testing internally with their own employees and with people that come in and are forced to sign NDAs. The issue is if you do this to general people, you're going to leak your products months and months in advance, and that's going to kill the sales of your current products. It's going to tip off your competitors. It's the same reason that smartphones aren't released early. It's the same reason consoles aren't.
Seeing a report that reports that our stream is down. I'm looking at the YouTube window being the issue here. Our YouTube window is saying it's not receiving enough video, even though I'm seeing it okay in OBS. What do you think the fix for this is, Heaney?
Uh, I, I, I don't
I'm
know.
gonna
Is it
refresh
something with your
the.
internet connection?
Uh,
Commenters, you can let us know if you can still hear us. Onakazi says we're back.
well, I just refreshed the YouTube window. Apparently, that's the fix. That's a fun one. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so they refreshed the page and we refreshed the page, and apparently that fixed the stream. Okay,
Yeah, I mean,
amazing.
I doubt this was anything to do with lack of testing. In many cases, this is similar to something that happens in gaming, where a lot of gamers, if a game releases with bugs, think that it's because testing never picked up on it. But in the vast majority of cases, every bug that a major game launched with, the testers already knew. QA found it months ago, but the company decided to ship before fixing it. There's many cases. There are other clear design flaws with the Quest Pro. The lenses, for example, don't stay still in place. You move
Heaney,
them.
you just blocked the mic somehow. You physically blocked the mic. You're muted now. Like you're physically muted.
How so? You can't hear what I'm saying?
That's really weird. I hear him muffled. Did you just slap the mic on your headset and now the mic is dislodged out of position?
I haven't touched it.
I still hear him muffled in the weirdest way. Oh my gosh. I don't know. That's the weirdest little bug that I've ever seen. Oh my gosh. Say something, Heaney.
Hello, can you hear me? I guess I would ask for the.
Something super low and buzzy, nice and ringing. Yeah. I don't know. My mic is still sounding good. I apparently got the maybe disconnect, quit the app, and come back, Heaney, see if that fixes it. It sounds like a physical difference between his mic, what it was like 5 minutes ago, and where it is now. Slap the mic again. Yeah, people responding to my theories. I love this. This is what I'm getting at here, right? Like, it's Heaney and I, when we test in our studio, like, we've had every possible thing go wrong in this, like, in his software based issues here, where, like, I'll see one version of reality, Heaney will see a completely different version of reality. And I think hard and long about that issue, where, like, uh, you can't have that. You can't have different versions of reality showing for different people. It makes you a little crazy because you don't know whether the software, hardware, what's going wrong. If you've ever
Can you hear me
helped
now?
a parent or an older person try to bug fix something with their computer, you can even see it in them the way it kind of makes them a little crazy trying to figure out what's actually going wrong with their hardware and their devices. Let's see if you're working, Heaney.
Can you hear me now? No.
No, Heaney. I hear you, but you're at like maybe a 5% of the volume you were at the beginning of the show. So that's a heck of a bug to suddenly hit. Maybe restart the whole headset and see if that fixes it. I don't know if you already did that. Amazing. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it did. It literally looked like you slapped the mic. Yeah, that's what I saw him like do something physically, and then all of a sudden his mic went to 5 of what it was. I guess I'll move on and it's dead, Jim Craigs. Yeah, I love this. All right. So Pico for sales disappoint. So this is a comment out there that Pico 4 sales are reportedly not what Pico were looking for. This is coming third-hand reporting, so we will have to see. Let me look and see if the stream is still up on my computer. I can't tell. Yeah, let me know if I'm still streaming out there. I think I'm still live. And of course, leave your yeah, Guy is saying my stream is up, so I am still out there broadcasting. Pico 4 sales disappoint. Pico is affected by this issue that they launched with no exclusive content. They announced just one exclusive game coming sometime next year, Just Dance. And in the communications from Pico, they're obviously trying this for the first time, I guess, in many years at this scale, coming to some Western nations, where it's unclear whether that exclusive is permanently exclusive to the Pico platform or just a timed exclusive. Over on Meta side of things, they've gone through a multi-year evolution of, oh, Heaney's back. Let's see what's going on with his microphone.
Are you able to hear me now?
You are louder now. That was a fun one.
There we
So
go.
another bug I had, so going back to the different layers, if you go back and look at our stream or our channel, previous video on our channel is Walkabout Mini Golf. I got mine. You can fill in your bingo card slot for that. They, they, if I did this recording setting where if I stop the recording, it kills the mic in the app entirely. And so I have to quit the app, come back into it, and then the mic works back to chat with somebody. So every time I killed that recording or stopped a recording, I would have to, there's some kind of an OS level glitch where the mic wouldn't be handed back to the app in question. Again, all I'm saying, yeah, there's multiple layers of bugs we can have, and it is impossible to tell. Heaney's right
So I
about,
do think I
yeah,
was just
go
going to
ahead.
say it's important to note that we are on the release software. I buy devices from many companies, from Google, from Meta, from Apple, from Samsung, and whatever's happened to hardware in the last 10 years, I don't think I've ever bought a device recently that hasn't had some sort of bug until the next patch after its release. As far as we know, that patch is planned for early December for Quest Pro. So, I'm not excusing this behavior. I do think that companies really should make sure that their products are ready to launch before they launch them. But I guess I've been worn down to the point where I no longer expect a product to really work properly until it gets that first post-launch patch.
Artful made the joke, the Walkabout Mini Golf DLC not to be missed. I should have written that as the headline. That is too good. Amazing. And yeah, Onakazi saying that physically pained me to read that because it is such a brutal dad joke there. That missed DLC is really, 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 really neat. We've got an article about it. Obviously, go through the tour video. It's really cool. Going back to Heaney and forgiveness, and to your point about a lot of these bugs probably getting caught in QA, I get it. I get that that's the classic thing on every device. There's a patch a few months later. And in a lot of ways, Meta is still in this build-up phase where I hate to say it this way, but the audience that is currently buying Meta products are still their beta group, right? It's still their, you're testing this stuff out for them so that they can reach tens and hundreds of millions in the next generations of their products. That's what you are to them if you're buying into their products at this generation. Quest 1 got sent out to pasture very quickly, replaced by Quest 2, which reached a much larger audience. And a lot of our reporting and our indicators here are that Quest 3 is going to kind of repeat that in a very big way in just terms of content, processing power, and achieving a larger audience. I think I'm just arguing that if Meta is doing this catch up to Apple, right? They're building out all the services and systems to match Apple and Google and Samsung at their level that they are. So Meta just rolled out quietly this program where you can spend a whole bunch of extra money, and if you drop your Quest on the floor and it smashes, you can go and get your Quest, send whatever's left of the device, and they'll, I assume, send you back a new working one. I haven't actually tested this out yet, but there is this program, and that program is comparable to the AppleCare Plus program over on Apple's side of things. I think I'm just arguing that it makes sense to me to, as they're building these things out and adding things like monthly payment programs, so you can buy the device for less setup, or buyback programs where you send in your old device and you get a discount on the new device. Then there's also this idea that you give kind of like priority status to the people who have been with you from the start. I don't think it makes sense to make people wait in line with everybody else. If you've been there as a supporter from the very start, it's a way to build trust and long term buy in with your very biggest, earliest supporters. So, you've got the PlayStation Plus program over on Sony's system. Uh, I don't see why those PlayStation Plus members shouldn't have gotten like first dibs on a lot of on new hardware purchases. This is the type of thing I just think industry wide it would make a lot of sense to give first dibs to a lot of your longest term supporters.
Well, sure, but then you'd have to do something like, oh, you have to be a PlayStation Plus member for 2 years or whatever, because otherwise someone would just pay a 1 month subscription as a kind of way to skip the queue for hardware. And yeah, it's an interesting idea, I think. But just to come back to what we were originally kind of talking about on this, I think it's very, very likely that Meta caught this issue with the microphone popping long before launch and just decided that there's a cost in time and money to
Yeah,
redesigning a product at a late stage, and they would have just decided, is this worth it? No, let's ship it. That's almost certainly what happened.
I get it, but it's I guess the thing that's just as wild to me is given the seriousness of this issue, Heaney can't come back into the studio in a Quest Pro without this fixed. I don't think this. We would assume like we would have. Like it's you're gonna have to be in Quest 2, but I'm not gonna come out of Quest Pro. I'm gonna stay in here because every report I see in our comments is saying that however this is fitting on my head, it's crisper, clearer, and I everything else about this is a
Well,
superior
I mean, I
setup.
did see some people saying that your quality is kind of lower than before. It does still have that proximity effect where I can hear it from here. The low frequencies are being amplified too much. It sounds like someone with their microphone too close to their mouth. That is the problem with the Quest Pro's microphone design. And I've been in Horizon Worlds and VR chat and noticed that people are complaining about every Quest Pro user's microphone because I hear these plosives that are very obvious, and also that same sort of I don't know the word for it, but the kind of buzzing distortion that you hear for low frequency noises. And maybe it doesn't come across on stream, but I can hear it from you here very clearly. So
How
yeah, I
dare you
do think
talk
we
about my
probably would
audio
have to
quality that
consider.
way?
Yeah, I do think we'd have to consider reverting to Quest 2 in that sense, or Pico 4 eventually. But should we talk about
Ooh.
Pico 4's news?
Yeah, I actually started to talk about it while you were doing your resetting. But yeah,
Yeah,
why don't you
see,
get into anything more specific there, Heaney?
there's Bicycle sort of saying that's the word I was looking for, tinny. It does, to me, it sounds, both of our voices sound kind of overall worse than on Quest 2. So yeah, we'll talk about Pico 4. The news here, I don't know what Ian said already, but there's a report from a Chinese news outlet that cites multiple Pico insiders as saying that the sales expectations have not been met so far. So Pico 4 is not selling as fast as ByteDance had hoped. And specifically, they had initially scaled down their supply order from 2.5 million to 1.8 million, but their sales target itself was to sell 1 million headsets this year. And with about a month and a half to go, based on the current trajectory, it looks like it's extremely unlikely that that will be met. So, yeah, ByteDance has clearly hoped for a little bit too much for a first generation Western consumer launch, I think.
Yeah, I covered some of that. And I'm seeing people still talking about. I'll say Jared Brown or Braun. No, the Oculus system doesn't allow the use of an external microphone. It is something we'd love to see supported at a software layer specifically for this issue.
So Guy Godin pointing out the other context to this story, that Pico was actually unable to deliver pre-orders on time and was out of stock for around 2 weeks. So he thinks there isn't a demand problem there. Although then again, you have to contrast that with the fact that this report does say that they scaled down their supply order in response to the demand that they were initially seeing. So This is only a report from a Chinese news outlet. This is not official data. We don't know if this is true. They claim to have cited multiple Pico employees. I think in total across this report, they're citing 4 different Pico employees. The report also talked about some of the issues that have been caused as Pico is acquired by ByteDance, with culture clash between the original Pico employees and the ByteDance employees. So I wouldn't read too much into this in general, because as I said, as I was kind of hinting at there, I don't think you should really expect a company like Pico to just jump into the Western consumer market, take on Quest, which has been a platform for almost 4 years now, and then just magically somehow be able to sell to same volume. Developers are still slowly porting all of their titles from Quest to Pico Store. There are still exclusives on Quest that are never going to come to Pico because Meta has either fully funded them or completely acquired the studios since then. As Ian often talks about, Meta has acquired 8 game studios in the past 3 years. So Pico will just need to play the long game here. This isn't something where you can just show up and immediately be a major player. You need to put significant funding into content. They need to come up with exclusives that are more appealing than just Dance VR, and they need to develop out their software platform to deliver the features and added functionality that Quest has. I still think that Pico will be a major player in this market, as I've said before, but I just don't think they can show up instantly. I think we'll have to see until Pico 5 or Pico 6 until that content library is actually competitive with Quest.
Any comments you want to respond to before we talk about the HTC leak? And Heaney, I just dropped a link into your DMs to check out. Since we went live, there was some more info shared about that. Yeah, anything you want to respond to?
Yeah, Gigo was saying the report might be for the Chinese market, not the global one. So there was a sub-report cited within this report that was about sales data for the Chinese market, but the sources that the report cites from Pico are talking about the entire sales. That 2.5 million, 1.8 million, 1 million is not just for the Chinese market. That is for Pico's entire global operation so far. I'm glad to hear that you seem to be, based on your comments, a big Pico fan, Guy Godin. I would say I am too. I'm actually, once we have support for it in the studio, I actually find it the most comfortable headset that, standalone headset that I own. So I personally prefer it. It's my preferred PC VR headset. But if at the end of the day, tech nerds like us, and I'm very much so including myself in that, buy devices because of their specs. But when you come to a gaming device, the average person buys it because of the games they can play on it. And if they look at Quest 2 and they see a bunch of games that aren't available on Pico 4, they're going to, in many cases, just pick Quest 2 because of those games. And it really does come down to content is king. Pico needs to build out a library that competes with Quest.
Guy saying that he's not going to reveal sales figures for Virtual Desktop, but they are good. I would love to know more specifically, one-to-one. If you compare the first few weeks on your Quest store, how does it compare to your first few weeks on Pico's store? I'd be curious to see that kind of comparison.
So I'd say the reliable data we'll be able to get here, some people will contest reliable, but the most reliable data is in the first week of December. We should get the Steam hardware survey for November, and there we should see how is Pico 4 being adopted for Steam users in that first month. So Pico Neo 3 is already on there. Obviously, all of the major headsets like Quest and Valve Index are on there. So we'll be able to pretty quantitatively see how many Steam VR users have adopted this. Although, of course, some people didn't get their headset until halfway into the month. Some people already haven't bought theirs. So the truest real indication of how this launch has gone won't really be seen until January's first week, when we should see the December Steam hardware survey data.
Pico 4 people using Virtual Desktop will count as Quest 2 users, so don't trust that number.
That's fascinating. Guy Godin, are you able to change it so the headset user agent or whatever the equivalent is, so that they will show up as Pico 4 eventually? Or is that something that isn't possible because it's on the Valve side? Because, yeah, you're right, that definitely will invalidate those results.
Yeah, it's such a bummer. We're so many years into this, and we still don't have a actual sales figure number to report on for some of these things. We're relying on these systems that are getting reported through I don't know, such such ways that can probably like be so Meta, the one of the most interesting things that Meta's released is about every 6 months or so now, they've been giving figures saying that a large percentage of the apps released on the actual Quest store are making millions of dollars in revenue. And they've been giving out these little sort of vanity stats indicating that uh, their sort of console strategy here of limiting how many apps actually released on the storefront, building out a release schedule. It's all being fairly successful for some of the apps that are out there. Of course, it's actually brutal for a lot of the devs going through App Lab because you don't have any distribution at all that way. You just have sort of any distribution you're actually able to do on your own versus the actual platform not sort of giving you that support. So it's tough to think about the different. I don't know. You've got such different audiences you need to serve. The joke being, why isn't Gorilla Tag on the main store, right, Heaney?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting to think about. Do we want to move on to talk about our final topic now, that Vive Flocus leak?
Yeah, let's. Sadly, it's Bradley still in our comments. I would be curious to hear him because I have some questions. I would be curious to hear him respond to them. But Heaney, why don't you run us through what we know?
Yeah, so in the same way that back in April, images of Quest Pro were leaked to the YouTuber, sadly, is Bradley, who, as Ian mentioned, it was in our comments earlier and may still be. It looks like, oh, there is Bradley. Hey, he still is in our comments. It looks like now images of the headset that HTC has been teasing over the past month have been leaked to him. And so Lynch said in his video that those images provided to him were in black and white, and the context of them would have revealed the person or people behind them. So instead of just showing the images, he has again worked with the product designer Marcus Kane to turn those images into 3D models for renders, and that's what you're seeing here, and that's what's seen in his video. So there would be slight artistic differences between those images and the 3D model, but in general, this should be representative of the device. So HTC's only teases over the past month have been along the lines of something like smaller is better, expect smaller, phrases like that indicate that they're planning on delivering a small headset. And that's exactly what you see in these renders. A headset that has a very sleek visor at the front with what looks to be the same pancake lenses that were in Vive Flow, and a design that instead of being powered by, or instead of having to be powered by an external battery, comes with a backplate that presumably includes a battery. But the unique aspect about this headset, according to Lynch's sources and his video, is that that backplate can detach, and then you can use your own power source, or you can connect it to a PC. So a use case for doing that in standalone mode would be if you want to lie back in bed or on a couch and watch virtual content or watch media content on a virtual screen. And the use case, obviously, for PC is that you don't need that battery if you're going to use it in PC in wired mode. And then you get rid of that extra weight on your neck and use it just as if they are glasses. Though, personally, based on the counterbalance aspect here, if I was using this for PC VR, I would probably prefer to keep it on, and that's just speculation based on having used the original Vive Flow. So in terms of the basic specs, Lynch is reporting that it will have 1920 by 1920 per eye LCD panels that go up to 120 hertz. So that is higher than any of Meta's headsets, but notably lower than the Vive Focus 3 and the Vive Pro 2 and Pico 4. So fascinating little device. Initially in the video, it was reported that the price may be lower than $1,000, but Bradley later said on Twitter that that's not true, that it would, based on his understanding, be north of $1,000. So it looks like HTC are once again drilling down on a very specific niche here, in that a headset that is much slimmer and lighter than what else is available in the market, that can kind of be modular and act as either glasses or a full headset design.
So I guess my only question, Heaney covered most of it, but I would love to hear, Bradley, how you vet your sources and how you differentiate between rumors and sort of verified info. I'm curious also whether you can fit more watermarks on your images. Sorry, that's a joke. Um,
Yeah, I got that what you sent earlier, Bradley. I think you tweeted out that initially in your video you said that this would use a much more powerful chip than the XR2 Gen 1, but now you've tweeted out that it actually will use that XR2 Gen 1. And in the same way, there was in the video, uh, this idea that it would be less than $1,000, and now you're saying it'll be more. So yeah, we'd be very curious to know sort of the source vetting there, and perhaps if there's a way to make sure that that can be more clearly related as to what is kind of definite and what is just rumors. Because I understand, your supply chain sources are likely very accurate when it comes to things like what are the components going into these headsets, what are the design, what are the basic functions. But when it comes to things like naming and pricing, that can be a lot more difficult to discern between what is, speculation and what was plans and what actually is going into practice.
yeah, HTC has this weird product line, right? If you go over to their website and try to pick out a headset, you can get lost between all the different sort of overlapping products. But this is an interesting one if it comes to pass like it is. HTC sort of has been doing this for years, sort of doing the drip marketing in the months leading up to January and CES. Of course, I think it was at the last CES they pulled out at the last second, didn't they, Heaney?
I don't recall whether they did or not.
Yeah, I could be mixing up my years because of the way sort of the years have blended together during the pandemic. But I do remember.
I mean, I don't think they had a product to show at last CES. It would have been 2022. They haven't released a headset in
Well,
2022.
I think that's what happened. I think we were expecting they actually reached out to us and talked to us, said they were going to show something, and then all of a sudden it just evaporated.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
remember. Sorry, I recall now. They were there. They were just showing off their kind of Vive Focus 3 and some of the accessories they came out with it. I did end up trying this.
Yeah, so I appreciate Bradley's response there. It's a hard thing to explain without giving things away. External sources versus internal sources, maybe. Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I think it's just from my perspective, and as like a longtime watcher of this industry, Bradley's been putting a lot of really interesting things out there, but it becomes hard to for the just average viewer to know what the difference is between rumor, report, confirmation, speculation. These things get a little bit muddled together as we build towards the actual launch of products. And when you're talking about internal specs and designs, like things like the XR2, the XR2 Plus, and the XR2 Gen 2, right? Those, at the very core of this industry and the things we're able to do with these devices, it's going to boil down to which headsets ship with which of these generations of chips. And it's we need to know at like that sort of layer what those chips are going to be and who's going to get them first. And I want to make sure that we, at least you and I, Heaney, we're so grounded in reporting that sort of thing. How many sensors? That was one thing that was surprising on the Meta side of things, right? Zuckerberg himself, within 6 months of release of the actual Quest hardware, said it has a depth sensor, and then the device actually arrives and the depth sensor is ripped out, and they're not even really communicating it up front that critical piece of hardware is now gone. And as close watchers, and Bradley ourselves all included, it's really, really hard to compress all of this stuff for our audience and really make clear, okay, this device is actually going to have a large software upgrade cycle because it's got all of this extra hardware underneath the hood. um, that's brought to bear, and even like Quest Pro, right? We're using Quest Pros for this show. Do we think Quest Pro has a long shelf life? We don't think it does, right? We think it's probably going to
Definitely
be
not.
outdated pretty quickly, don't we?
No, yeah, I my suspicion is, and I want to be clear, this is just my speculation. I suspect this Quest Pro was originally on the longer time scale, supposed to come out last year. I think there's a good indication that it will be replaced in around 2 years rather than this 3 year cycle that we're seeing out of Quest 2. And I would expect you're going to see some pretty dramatic upgrades in the next iteration of this product. It'll be more like, in my view, what happened to Quest One to Quest Two, rather than what's happening from Quest Two to Quest Three, where it looks like it'll be an iterative upgrade in the external and a major upgrade in the internal, but over a 3 year life cycle. Just to come back on this headset, what really what fascinates me is the idea that they're still using these same lenses from the Vive Flow, and I'm not saying they're identical, but they look essentially identical, and they're actually uh, the same component that was shown off in a lot of different reference designs from a lot of different companies. So that's what makes me think that this is the same. Because the problem is that the pancake lenses we got on Pico 4 and Quest 2 reduced the size of the headset, but also widened the field of view. On Quest Pro, widened the field of view. But with these pancake lenses, when I reviewed Vive Flow, I noticed that it actually had a narrower field of view. So I really wonder who this is supposed to be for. If they're going to deliver a device that isn't as high a resolution as Pico 4, doesn't have the wide field of view of either of these devices. And really, the only kind of unique aspect here is that you can detach the back and use it as a wired PC headset. But PC enthusiasts are looking for a wider field of view, they're not looking for a narrow. So, again, this comes down to the same problem we had when I reviewed Vive Flow. Presumably, and this is a massive assumption, this thing would be called Vive Flow 2. Who is it for? It is a niche within a niche of people who want to use headsets specifically for media viewing, for to have virtual monitors, to have a virtual cinema screen. I'm not saying that those use cases are rare. I'm just saying that if you want those use cases, why wouldn't you buy a headset that does it almost as good as this, but also gives you all of the other functionality of being able to have a wider field of view and play the games on the Quest Store, for example, or have some of the unique aspects of the Pico device, or if you're going to something like Valve Index to have the tracking or the audio. What is going to be the actual selling feature of this device is still an unanswered question, even with all of this information leaked so far.
Bradley with a really great comments here saying, I feel every industry has these sorts of discrepancies when it comes to leaks, in my opinion. I think there's still no stuck in stone source for leaks because the VR market has been too small. And where did the second comment go? Just went past it. I've only been really doing this for a year, and gathering sources is the hardest part. I feel I'm improving, but still not where I want to be in reliance, if that makes sense. I really, really appreciate that self-aware, honest opinion of where he is. Um, I would love to have more dialogue with you, Bradley, you, me, and Heaney, talking about this issue, about sort of making sure we're providing reliable stuff. Your videos are incredible deep dives, and you've given everyone so much to talk about. I think the thing I guess I always get hung up on is how do we all move in the direction of being more reliable and more clear and more accurate over time, and get those sources. Because one thing that I guess I notice is you can, with HTC in particular, they've been drip feeding out info publicly. Are they also drip feeding out info privately in order to build more buzz via leaks? And how how very large mega corporations use journalists and YouTubers isn't always necessarily clear to the audience, and cutting through that hype and getting accurate information without hype is something that I think people need to hear more and more and more. So it's something that we've always got to kind of be checking ourselves on and checking each other on, I think.
Yeah, at the same time, I think some of the maybe I misread the comments went past very quickly. I think some people were calling, for the sources to be revealed publicly. I think at the same time that is very unrealistic. That's not how this works because the very way that people get sources for these sort of things is on the condition that they're not revealed, and it can be very frustrating to a reader or a viewer to not be able to get those sources. But the alternative is that you don't get the information at all. It isn't that you get the information with those people because they would very likely lose their jobs if they were to find that out. And then obviously, if they were revealed without their permission, that person would never have the trust of sources again.
Yeah, so I missed the comments too, but the thing that I think that Heaney and I go back to is there's a motivation that accompanies information getting out to public, and assessing that motivation alongside the actual information and then working to verify. Like it's this process that happens behind the scenes by journalists, by YouTubers, by everyone trying to get information out to the public. But it's that motivation thing that isn't always getting out there. You'll see New York Times stories, Wall Street Journal stories. They call them hit pieces a lot of times. That's the industry term for these things, where you've got really frustrated former employees who just got fired or their project got canceled going and speaking to a reporter and just making you end up hating the company because they told this horrible story about what happened inside. A lot of those stories are rooted in a lot of truth, but they come from a perspective that has to be balanced with other perspectives. And that is ultimately like the challenge of our job, and knowing when to reveal those motivations and when not to is something that we always have to think about as well.
Yeah, definitely a very, very complex topic, but it'll be fascinating to see exactly how HTC positions this product in the market. Exactly, is this going to be a Vive Focus pitched as a direct Pico 4 and Quest 2 competitor, or will it just be called, as I'm expecting, Vive Flow 2 and be pitched as just this successor to this incredibly niche product that, as far as I'm aware, did not achieve any kind of mass market success? It's really difficult to know what HTC is actually doing here. And I want to be clear that a lot of people always say HTC is failing in VR, and that's not true. HTC is very, very successful in enterprise and business and government sector VR, but they have definitely lost their way in recent years in consumer VR. And so what a lot of people, ourselves included, are always wondering and waiting to see is, will HTC ever be able to find a path back into consumer VR, or will it forever kind of be in this position where its business is in the enterprise sector, but its marketing is still towards consumers for some bizarre reason?
Some argument in our comments about Meta's long-term planning, and I saw James, I think, comment up earlier that if the Quest Pro doesn't have a long shelf life, he may be done with Meta, and I think that was an interesting perspective there. Uh, I would be. I'm starting to wonder, Heaney, if they're going to try to go to an annual release cycle, and that is really the plan, right? Quest 3 next year, Quest Pro 2, and then just go annually. But
Well, yeah, I
yeah,
mean, yeah, you mean sort of for each product line, 2 years.
yeah, yeah, 2 years
It's
for each product line, and then you get annual that way.
I suspect they're going to go with 3 years for the consumer and 2 years for the enterprise. I think because enterprise are more looking for cutting edge features because they have more money to throw around, because it's not as much of an issue. If you're really using these devices to make money and profit, you're not going to care if you have to replace them every 2 years if it means you get a dramatically better experience. But if you want to have, if you want to ship a product that people are going to buy because they're not concerned it's going to be just replaced next year, you do what Microsoft does with Xbox and what Sony does with PlayStation, and you deliver a long life. I really think that's what Meta is likely to do when it comes to the mainline Quest. I think that's, we know now that Quest 2's lifespan will be 3 years. We have that confirmation that Quest 3 is launching later next year. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't do that again with Quest 4, especially if they're continuing this trend of releasing the device with the cutting edge, newest processor available, which means that for some of those first orders, that first kind of batch in that first season, they're going to be taking a heavier loss than they will over time as the cost of that chip comes down.
Yeah, I'm seeing people talking about sales and HP Reverb G2 going on sale this holiday season. I saw it also in my email right when I came in here. The thing to keep in mind is our reporting on previous shows that Reverb G2 is at the end of its life cycle, and even Windows Mixed Reality itself as a platform hasn't seen significant changes. We put questions to HP and to Microsoft to find out whether the status of these product lines. Uh, uh, that is kind of like, okay. So Quest Pro is this brand new product, and we're talking about it not being all right. So Adi's reviewer over at The Verge, she said that it made more sense to go and get three Quest 2s rather than one Quest Pro. And I loved that analysis right up there in the subhead of her article, because I think for a lot of our viewers, isn't that going to probably be the better choice, right? Have a multiplayer experience with multiple headsets than go and getting this device?
Well, yeah, I don't think literally she meant that you should actually get three and use them in that way. I mean, I think it's more just that it doesn't deliver the value of multiple headsets. But I think this comes back to, a comment we have here from Wolveraza saying Quest 3 will have lower specs than the Pro, and that's actually not true. From what we understand, Quest 3's processor will have about twice the power of Quest Pros. And that may sound confusing because how would a product that's going to be $300 to $500 do that compared to a product that's $1,500? And it's again because from what we understand and from what we can assume based on our understanding, the Quest Pro is not sold at a loss. The Quest Pro is likely to have at least a somewhat healthy margin there. It's also a device that is being pitched around not its raw performance or its raw specs, but its feature set, around the fact that it has the color pass through before Quest 3, that it has the face tracking and the eye tracking that Quest 3 is likely to not get at all, that it has the included charging pad, that it has the self tracking controllers, that it has this premium design with a headband and the battery in the rear. None of those things I just mentioned at the end there are expected to arrive in Quest 3. So, but the core specs of Quest 3 will likely push past it. It's really the sense that we're talking about these as different product lines. These are not supposed to be considered like versions. Quest Pro is not a version of the Quest 2. It is, from a marketing perspective, from the kind of people that Meta expects to buy it and from the kind of people that are likely to buy it, just a completely different kind of device than the mainline Quest. For the majority of our viewers, for the majority of our readers, for the majority of tech buyers, you can essentially ignore the existence of the Quest Pro. Just pretend it's an early dev kit for Quest 3, because at $1,500, the vast majority of people will never even consider it, never mind buy it.
I really love that, and I cannot wait to see what the XR2 Gen 2 is capable of. We've we've talked about it again and again, but I really I'm the thing that I'm wondering about with the HTC product here, Heaney, is we don't expect this device to have any interoperability with Steam VR tracking or the trackers at all, right?
No, it looks like this is going to have inside out tracking. It should then support HTC's standalone tracker that can go around your wrist or be attached to other objects, but not that conventional SteamVR Lighthouse tracker. No, but I mean that is as difficult as this is for some people to accept, that is an extremely niche market compared to where VR is today. That's more akin to the kind of market size VR was years ago when we had the Rift and Vive. It's not, the market today is just orders of magnitude larger than that, and people who will never ever want to pay $150 per base station and $100 per tracker to set up this kind of complexity.
Mm, uh, the there's a Shirzad question. Thank you for the donation. Is image quality limited to a link cable by compression, or is it GPU dependent? If so, is 4090, do you get a pure signal out of that? I think is what the question is.
Yeah, so I believe, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said that your sources indicate that this would have a native uncompressed DisplayPort input. If we want to be technically accurate here, DisplayPort in many modes does do very slight compression that is quasi lossless, essentially lossless. But what you mean is there an actual kind of heavy USB level compression? okay, sorry, you haven't said that. That was someone else who had misquoted you. I saw on Twitter. So we don't know whether this device will have a raw DisplayPort. What I would note about this topic is that I think this is a little bit over considered. I think some people are purist about this in a way that's not really going to be necessary over time. If you look at some of the compression codecs that are coming up, AV1, H.266, if you look at the kind of bandwidth that you get from Wi-Fi 6E and the kind of bandwidth that is expected to be delivered in Wi-Fi 7, I expect that the gap between compressed VR and uncompressed VR is going to narrow to the point where I would seriously wager that if some of the people who are asking for this were put into a double blind test and asked in 2 or 3 years, or even 1 or 2 years from now, to tell the difference, they would not be able to. So I think companies, it would be great for the people who want it if companies can deliver this. But if it's something that's going to add cost and complexity to the product, personally, I would rather the companies focus on just supporting Wi Fi 6E and supporting the newer compression codecs.
Yeah, I'm completely different subject, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, as I always do. But I think one of the things that will help our audience over time is to make sure that they've got the context of these companies when they're making these choices, right? The thing about the Quest 2 life cycle is it had such massive software upgrades over time, and it didn't launch with hand tracking, and now hand tracking is really great on, this is a Quest Pro, but the Quest 2 hand tracking is fantastic as well. And yet there's still a giant gap between how fantastic that hand tracking is and doing things like sign language or
I
having
wouldn't use
operating
fantastic.
all.
I
What?
don't think I think in a few years calling this fantastic will seem silly. I don't think this hand tracking on either of these devices is fantastic.
Fair, 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 absolutely fair. And I think that's a really interesting way of framing the path ahead, right? Calling any headset fantastic, calling any of these technologies great is embarrassing when you think of where they need to be 5 or 10 years from now. And it's the challenge of our reporting, right? But I think the reason I guess I go off on this tangent is people who are coming into this fresh don't quite understand that Pimax is such a small organization from China, and HTC actually has a really big business for business owners, and they've got uh, a large organization there that's delivering to business customers in a really significant way. And then also putting those two companies in context of Meta, which is operating on almost arguably at a completely different level in terms of software investment, hardware investment, and yet they still have these problems, really ugly problems in terms of like this microphone issue. But they're operating on a completely different level with lots and lots of software updates likely to their platforms.
Yeah, I do think, to come back on your general first point there about these devices being early and looking at the long term, like we've always said on this show, we've been saying for years, this is still the early years of VR. That may sound hard to believe if you've been in this industry for 5 or 10
Looks like the
years. It
stream
may
is having
sound,
some issues. I'm going to refresh it again.
sure. Let us know in the comments. D1360VR is saying we are back, so I'm just going to continue talking. Yeah, as I was saying, this is still the early days of VR. If you've been around for a long time, for 5 or 10 years, that might sound crazy to you, but just think of how long it took for pocket computers to become the smartphones we have today. People often talk about smartphones as if it was a device sector that started with the iPhone, but that's completely not true. There were pocket computers that existed in the late 80s, in the early 90s, and these devices eventually over time evolved into what you saw on the iPhone. The iPhone was actually the culmination of almost 2 decades of evolution in that device form factor. It was a uniquely revolutionary evolution. It was not a new device sector. We've really only had these viable consumer head mounted displays for arguably only since the release of Quest 1 3 years ago. This is going to be one of those sectors where the technology in 10 years is going to be so far ahead of what we have today that we're going to look back on it in the same way that we look back at kind of tiny CRT televisions, or we look back at those giant chunky laptops that had, 600 by 400 screens back in the 90s. This is still the earliest of the earliest, and all of these companies are only just getting started and learning what works.
Yeah, it's tricky. I appreciate Heaney's context there, and I saw someone said that VR is not an early industry, and it's, there's those charts I'm seeing circulate on Twitter that show this hype cycle where you've got hype, hype, hype a building, and then this crash of hype, and then this slow build as a real market develops. And every one of those charts I've ever seen uh, changes where they actually start the beginning of that thing, right? Is the peak of this hype Quest 2, or was the peak the Rift back in 2016? Or have we even gotten to the peak yet, right? And you remember VR started back in the 80s, and you can go back to examples of the technology going back to the 60s, or even go to stereoscopic displays going back to the 1800s. Like, where you start that chart totally changes your analysis and where we are, and it's kind of absurd the ways you can analyze this and confuse people if you focus on it too much.
So, controversial opinion here, but I really think that the Gartner hype cycle is overhyped, and it really doesn't measure anything useful. Hype is
Wow, what
such
an
a
amazing quote. I love that.
hype is such a arbitrary subjective concept. What we should be looking at is adoption cycles, not hype. Hype is a media concept of what people are talking about. Let's look at the actual real usage of how many people are owning and using these devices over time. And to come back on that idea of, oh, VR is an old industry, we're not saying that VR is new. We're saying that viable consumer VR is new. In the same way that, believe it or not, electric cars were actually invented in the 1800s, the 1890s, more than 100 years ago. But viable electric cars that anyone would actually want to buy only emerged in the 2010s. In the same sense, yes, there were VR headsets in the 60s. Yes, there were VR headsets in the 80s and 90s. But let's be honest, they were terrible. Anyone who's used them will tell you they were terrible. They had a refresh rate of like 20 hertz. The resolution was like 200 by 100. The latency was hundreds of milliseconds. They were displaying wireframe environments. What matters is, when does a technology actually get good enough for consumers to want to use it? And when you've gotten to that, you've only gotten to the minimum baseline. That you've not reached the final point. It's still then more than a decade usually until that technology actually evolves to be good enough for not just some consumers, but every consumer. And VR is still very early in that specific evolution.
I love that. And yeah, James saying that Heaney is so meta. Yeah, we'll mark that in Heaney's, quotables file there. Him calling the hype cycle overhyped is a wonderful moment for this show. Any comments you want to respond to, Heaney?
Just Artful pointing out, and some others, that when it comes to games, good games even take 2 to 3 years to develop. So, standalone VR with Quest, Oculus Quest, has only been around for just over 3 years. So developers that would have seen the success of Quest and decided to start building games will only have done so at the most 2 years ago, in many cases 1 year ago. So there are probably some of the most pivotal VR games that will ever be released that are deep in development right now, and we won't see for the next 1, 2, and 3 years. So even if you're just coming to this show and VR in general from a gaming perspective, I think you're going to see things that surprise you, and we're not going to be in this era of seeing kind of these small releases for long. And as Ian pointed out in his editorial, Meta itself has acquired 8 game studios in the past 3 years and has not announced a single game from any of them yet, because, as Artful points out, these things take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to actually be delivered. And in general, the consumer tech sector has been so enamored with these short-term smartphone cycles for so long that many people have forgotten how long it takes for really truly new technologies and content like massive games to be developed. But the facts will not change. Not every technology and content type can be shut down into this little 12-month smartphone cycle. It is the exception, not the rule.
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot about our time checking out that HDR display, Heaney. We had a conversation with the head of display systems over at Meta Research earlier this year, and he was talking about the CGRAPH Computer Graphics Conference. It's one of these conferences that not a lot of people pay attention to who are consumers, but all the researchers pay attention to because it is where the very beginning of these things get shown. And you can see it going back decades. That person we talked to was showing lenslet microdisplays a long time ago, a decade ago, I think while he was working at NVIDIA. And it's taken a long time for him to get into a place where he's actually shipping tech into headsets. But when Heaney and I looked through that HDR display, which was showing 20,000 nits, and Heaney's commenting that, like, you feel the realism go up as the brightness goes up. And you think that we're at 100 nits displays or a couple hundred nits displays. And what Heaney and I saw in that headset was 20,000, and realizing that there's a massive 10, 20-year cycle before we actually get to brightness in these displays that looks anything like the brightness we get out of reality itself, out of the sun reflecting off of the surfaces around us. And it's just a massive, massive problem that we're going to have to see uh, rolled out in successive generations. The other one that's dear to my heart because I've been following it so much is varifocal. Uh, my point here is things like HDR and varifocal are going to move forward this industry in ways that no one outside of a few people in these researchers' labs have really grasped in fundamental ways. And those things are still ahead of us. Those ideas are eventually going to come in these devices as soon as we've got chips to power them. We ready to wrap this up, Heaney?
Yeah, I think it's time to wrap this up. This has been a very long show. We've had some great discussion here. And, as always, I really appreciate the quality of discussion we have in these comments. It is far beyond what you normally expect in the YouTube comment sections of other shows. And I'm continuously glad that we can have this kind of deep, important and relevant discussion without devolving into some of the simplicities that you see elsewhere on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative that we had Guy Godin out there and sadly it's Bradley both participating in this discussion and being part of, exactly what he's talking about. We are trying to cut to the core of some very complicated issues and have nuance. Heaney keeping me on task when I go off on my tangents, while also trying to get that wider context of this industry out onto this. If you want to go see something you can do with your headset right now that is mind-blowing, go and check out the Mist course for Walkabout Mini Golf. I love the story there that game came out in the 1990s. You only had one frame in front of you at a time. You had to click to get a new frame and move to a different view. Just 2 years ago, they adapted that experience, or maybe it was 1 year ago. They adapted that experience to virtual reality, so you could actually go and visit that island that you filled in with your imagination back in the 90s and the 2000s. Now it's actually a real environment you could walk around in. And then now, via the power of VR, they've adapted it into a theme park. You can go to a virtual reality theme park with other people and go around this island, and you could do your meetings that way. You could have a gathering with friends. And as much as we talk about the far off things, that is something amazing you can do that just came out today. And yes, apologize for the issues with our stream. We will try to figure out what's going on with the mic and figure out a way to combat that over time. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you in the future. I can't do my Spock fingers. So
Thanks
fix
so much.
that, Meta. Darn it. All right. We'll see you.